Hello there, everyone. Good evening and welcome to the first of two psychological letters from Maurice Nicoll. This first is a short psychological talk, and then tomorrow we'll have a more in-depth psychological commentary. So, as always with Maurice Nicoll, there's lots of information, lots of wisdom and knowledge packed into these short commentary letters. And yeah, I hope you are enjoying them. I believe I had a little look at the table of contents earlier. I believe we're about halfway through volume 1, so progressing rather nicely. And I will continue to upload In Search of the Miraculous chapters as well as the Perennial Philosophy. They all tie in rather nicely with the four ideals and the philosophy behind it, which I do plan to speak a lot more about. But for now, let's get in to this psychological talk from Birdlip, May the 18th, 1942. We will now speak of the observation of connections between centers in the form of eyes. As you know, this work begins with self-observation because the subject of it is this invisible thing called oneself, which we usually take for granted and which can only be observed by each person individually. The first thing is to realize that you are not one and the same person either at different moments or at the same moment. In the first practice of self-observation, you are told to observe that you have quite different centers or minds in you which work simultaneously. You have thoughts, emotions, and movements. Taking only these three centers, namely the intellectual center, the emotional center, and the moving center, they are three utterly different things. Now, every person is a meeting house of eyes. The different eyes in you have their representation in all these three centers in more or less degree. That is, every eye in you has its representation in these three different minds or centers, and so appears quite differently in each center, in fact so differently that it takes a long time before we can trace the manifestation of an eye in all these three forms of it. Although other centers exist, let us speak of the intellectual, emotional, and moving centers. Every eye in a man is represented in these three centers, and here we have the human machine as three centers. The three-story diagram, it would be called, in Search of the Miraculous, where you have at the top the intellectual center located in the head, the emotional center in the heart, and the moving center in the muscles, it's saying. Representation of an eye as having a head and a heart and certain muscles. And again, Ouspensky gives a different commentary in Search of the Miraculous, which you can go away and find and look into. But essentially, I'm sure Maurice Nicoll is saying something very similar. In trying to control an observed eye, you must remember that it is something that thinks and feels and moves. That is, each representation of it in each center is different. The control of the human machine is difficult, therefore, because everything that is formed in it psychologically, namely as an eye, is represented in three entirely different ways that seem at first sight unconnected. For example, you frown. This is in moving center. But this frowning is represented in the emotional center as a feeling, and it is represented in the intellectual center as a thought or a gramophone record, that is, a series of thoughts going round and round mechanically. Full observation of an eye is the observation of it in all the three centers of its origin simultaneously. Let us now find an example for general discussion. Let us take worrying. Question: what is worry? Does the work say anything about worrying, and how can it be stopped? Answer: worrying is a form of identifying. Literally, the word has the meaning of tearing and twisting or choking and strangling. It was originally connected with the word ring, which is still used in the expression wringing one's hands, one of the outward signs of worry. You'll remember that every psychological or inner state finds some outer representation via the moving center. That is, it is represented in some particular muscular movements or contradictions, etc. You may have noticed that a state of worry is often reflected by a contracted wrinkling of the forehead or a twisting of the hands. States of joy never have this representation. Negative states of worry or fear or anxiety or depression, represent themselves in the muscles by contraction, flexion, being bowed down, etc., and often also by weakness in the muscles, whereas opposite emotional states are reflected into the moving center as expansion, as standing upright, as extension to the limbs, relaxing of tension, and usually by a feeling of strength. To stop worry, people who worry and thereby frown too much or pucker up and corrugate their foreheads, clench their fists, almost cease breathing, etc., should begin here by relaxing the muscles expressing the emotional state and freeing the breath. Relaxing in general has behind it, esoterically speaking, the idea of preventing negative states. Negative states are less able to come when a person is in a state of relaxation. That is why it is said so often that it is necessary to practice relaxing every day by passing the attention over the body and deliberately relaxing all tense muscles. And you should be able to find this practice online if you search the canon of the limbs, where you sense each limb in turn in a canon fashion. But yeah, you'll have to look into that on your own. But it should be available, and if you do it, you will be able to sense and observe your separate limbs in a more sort of direct and clear way. So, as Maurice Nicoll saying here, it's very important to practice relaxing every day, and if you're a relaxed person, well, then you probably find you don't worry too much or get too anxious naturally, as Maurice Nicoll saying. But let's continue. Control of the emotional center is difficult directly, partly because it works so quickly, 30,000 times more quickly than the formatory part of the intellectual center, so that a man gets worried or negative before he knows it. But the emotional center is sometimes in the work compared with an uncontrolled rogue elephant, with two controlled elephants on either side of it, namely the intellectual center and the moving center. Wrong emotional states, habitual bad states of worry, crossness, etc., must first be noticed as existing in one. As a rule, people do not see their states but are them. Next, one of the controlled elephants must be used. Let us consider what it means to use the intellectual center in this respect. This means that you must notice the thoughts that are going on when you are worrying. We have a certain amount of will over the intellectual center, that we can control thought to a small extent. By stopping, or not going with, not believing in, not consenting to, the thought part of worrying, one elephant, so to speak, is brought alongside the uncontrolled emotional center. The other controllable elephant is the moving center, over which we have will if we direct attention to it. We can relax muscles and so on. As you know, in the directions given in the work about relaxing, it is said first that the small muscles must be relaxed, the small muscles of the face, the muscles of expression particularly. This includes the eye muscles, the muscles round the mouth and chin, the tongue and throat and scalp muscles, and so on. To return to worrying, worrying is the wrong work of centers. It is always useless. It is a form of inner considering, i.e., of identifying. It is a continual mixing up of negative imagination with a few facts, and so makes only wrong connections in centers. It is a sort of lying, among the many other kinds of lying that go on in us and mess up the centers. It is always easy to worry, as it gives a relief and, as it were, a form of justifying oneself. It is close to self-pity and violence. Worrying is not thinking. The mind is driven by the worry, by the emotional state, and is obscured. Attention to anything always helps, for directed attention puts us into more conscious parts of centers. Worrying is not thinking of others. It is not external considering. It is mixed up with oneself, and this takes a long time to observe distinctly. In learning how to live from the work point of view so that we live more consciously in life, or live in the work in life and not just in life without anything between us and life, worrying is one of the things that show us something about ourselves if we notice it uncritically and over a long enough period. But you must not think that the opposite of worrying is indifference. You can and should feel anxiety about another person in danger, a mixture of hope and fear, but worrying is quite different, for then the imagination comes in. It becomes a habit, just as do so many other negative states, and people even imagine they are better than others by having them and feel merit in worrying. People even think it is right to worry about everything, about the past and the future, about themselves, about others, and so on. This is simply nothing but a serious negative illness, difficult to cure, for once a person has become nothing but an inverted machine for worrying, all sorts of wrong connections have been established and everything works in the wrong way. And since the only thing he enjoys is worrying, to deprive him of this, were it possible, would be to destroy his chief interest. In this connection, you will remember one of the work sayings, that you are asked, above all, to do one thing to give up your particular form of suffering. This sounds easy. Try it. The reason why it is so difficult is because to do so is to destroy whole systems of eyes in yourself that enjoy making you suffer, and that you think you are. To return to the question, what is worrying? Since it is a form of identifying, it means that it brings about a continual loss of force. And just very quickly, we'll say a bit more about it at the end, but think about if thinking and thoughts take energy away, a recurring cycle of worrying, it's a constant leakage, right? It's a leaking of energy, and the thoughts just recur round and round and round until one can become frantic if they go to the extreme limit. But yes, I'll say more about that maybe at the end, but back to worrying. Don't worry about that. To return to the question, what is worrying? Since it is a form of identifying, it means that it brings about a continual loss of force. People who worry a great deal exhaust themselves, drain themselves of force. If you will notice yourself when you are worrying, you will see that it really is like tearing and twisting and strangling oneself inside, corresponding with the outer muscular movements which have already been described. There is no center of gravity. There is no direction, no clear aim. Everything is in disorder. Everything is, as it were, running about in oneself in every direction. It is as if all the different eyes in oneself got up and rushed about, wringing their hands and saying anything that the negative imagination which dominates the scene suggests to them. I'm not saying that it is possible never to worry. There are situations, especially today, where it is well nigh impossible to stop it at times. I'm speaking more of habitual tendencies to worry about everything and take every event as a source of worry. To formulate clearly what one is going to do to have some direction helps to prevent this state of disorder, which is, as said, a form of internal considering and is not external considering. Internal considering is always mechanical. External considering is always conscious. It is consciously putting yourself in another person's position, and since this requires directed attention, it takes you out of worrying. If you notice, you will see that little forms of worrying start very early in the morning. It is a very good thing which is worth doing to work on oneself in the early morning before, as it were, descending into life and duty. A little conscious work at that time, noticing the small beginnings of worrying or negative thoughts or self-pity, etc., and saying no to them, lifting oneself out of them, not taking them as you. All this work on non-identifying with certain machines, certain eyes in the early morning, can alter the whole day. And to this, of course, belongs the idea of cancelling debts, letting go all inner accounts, if possible. Then something fresh and new begins the day, and the staleness of life is prevented, which is really the staleness of oneself, always reacting in the same way to everything, always having the same views, always taking others in the same way, and so on. Work on yourself can have marvelous results if you remember you are in life in the work and not in life without anything between you and it. The work is to transform your relations to life. All the practical things said in it have this object. This is to work on oneself. That is, it is to be in the work, in life, not in life. What is your task? Why are you down here? What is it that you have to change? What is it that you have to learn about yourself, this thing you take for granted, this thing that is your apparatus for living? Does your apparatus for living give you the results you wish for? Yourself, your personality, is the apparatus you are using for living life? It is good to begin to see that your way of taking life is your life, and that you can begin to work on your way of taking it, and that means working on yourself and your mechanical reactions to all that happens. For your mechanical reactions to life are yourself, and that makes your unhappiness and happiness, and this thing called yourself is the apparatus for living life that you have made and which has been made in you by thousands of forgotten causes. This is the thing we wheel out every morning to face the day with. I'll read that sentence again because it's very powerful, and if you're acting consciously in the world, then you are not just wheeling out this thing, how he describes it. At the bottom of the page, for your mechanical reactions to life are yourself, and that makes your unhappiness and happiness, and this thing called yourself is the apparatus for living life that you have made and which has been made in you by thousands of forgotten causes. This is the thing we wheel out every morning to face the day with. And this is the thing the work speaks of in all its stages, the thing that you can work upon and alter. Try to think that it is not life you can change, but yourself in your reaction to life. This is where the first idea of what it means to work on oneself lies. Once you see the idea, then, whatever the conditions of life, you have a power in your grasp whose value is beyond price. You have begun to grasp the pearl, to see what life on earth really means. For a long time we absorb every kind of negative emotion, identifying with it and taking it as ourselves, as necessary, as true, and try to work on it once it has formed itself. But the time comes when it cannot form itself. Now the effect of not going with some mechanical reaction in yourself and feeling you are free in respect of it is quite magical. You will notice what happens. It is very interesting, but it is a matter of your own experience. You will perhaps grasp that the work is not mere dull labour, it is freeing thought through a peculiar inner effort, which is called work on oneself. And there's a little note at the end of this letter. During the months of March and April 1942, Dr. Nicoll was writing a series of papers on the Gospels, which I believe becomes the book The New Man. And perhaps we can read The New Man later on, which is like a combination of work ideas and the gospel. But that's the short letter today, and we will continue speaking about psychology and the psychological commentary tomorrow evening at the same time. But there's again a lot of practical ideas and practical solutions there in this letter from Maurice Nicoll, and I suppose I should start by saying one of the fundamental things that we learn In Search of the Miraculous, and of course early in the commentaries, is that we never remember ourselves. Gurdjieff says that the main issue is man never remembers himself, so one goes through the day asleep as a machine, constantly reacting to everything occurring around us, worrying all the time, anxious about what might happen, worrying about what's gone before. Should I have done that a bit differently? What if they think this way about me? All of these things constantly going on, and we never come back to ourselves, to our own being, to our own essence, to our lives, to the three centers that is mentioned, and we never observe ourselves. And the first task, of course, is to see this worrying, particularly if it's an intense worry, like he says there, when we wheel ourselves out to face the world of a morning. Maybe we're already worrying. Maybe many millions of people on this earth, I would argue, the first thought they have is a worry about what's to come later on in the day, whether that's going to work, meeting up with someone that caused them anxiety, having to do something that they don't particularly want to do. Millions of people, they awaken, they realize they've wheeled themselves out, and then the worry comes in, and it can be very intense in this modern world. It can, people can be paralyzed by this worry, by this anxiety. But the first thing to do, of course, is to see it, to observe it, to shine the light of consciousness on it, and then it ceases to be such a powerful force. We see it as something separate, as Maurice Nicoll says in this letter, as a series of eyes that group together and enjoy causing us suffering. They like to do it. That's their nature, their purpose, if you like, their purpose for being, the worrying eyes. It's in the name, of course. They love to worry. They love to just go round and recur. And of course, it's a large part of his imagination. People with more vivid imaginations, they're better worriers because they can visualize all sorts of crazy things. And so this was the first thing. And I wanted to read, I think, if I can find it. 1 second, I'm going to try and find it. Yeah, here in the middle of the screen. The work is to transform your relations to life. All the practical things said in the work have this object. This is to work on oneself. That is, it is to be in the work, in life, not in life. What is your task? Why are you down here? What is it that you have to change? What is it that you have to learn about yourself? This thing you take for granted, this thing that is your apparatus for living. Does your apparatus for living give you the results you wish for? So if you're a perpetual worrier and have intense anxiety, likely your body, your being, your apparatus, your soul, it's not giving you the results you want. So of course, you can use a manual, a roadmap, like in Search of the Miraculous, and begin going about changing that, worry less, or at least observe these things in you. And just very quickly, while I remember, a very powerful prayer, if one is worrying intensely, a way to affirm, in a sense, what one can do in this state of worry, or a thing that one can do to affirm the worry and to remove it somewhat. This is the Serenity Prayer, and the Serenity Prayer. Where's the full version? The Serenity Prayer is as follows. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So that first section, when you're worrying about something, if you imagine a diagram, like a choice diagram, you've got the thing you're worrying about, and then there's two forks coming off of it. Can you change it? Can you do anything to change it? Yes or no? If it's no, of course, this is the Serenity Prayer. Accept the things I cannot change. If the answer is yes, well then think about what that might be. What can you do to change the situation? And then, well, go and do that. And then if you can't change anything, then you have to accept it and the courage to change it if you can. And of course, that takes energy. It might be intense. It might mean a difficult conversation, and the wisdom to know the difference. And then it goes on, living one day at a time, enjoying the moment, one moment at a time, accepting hardship as a pathway to peace, taking, as Jesus said, this sinful world as it is, not as I would have it, trusting that you will make all things right if I surrender to your will, so that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with you forever in the next. Amen. And of course, that's a Christian prayer, but in a sense, if you take that prayer into your heart and soul, then it's like having a barrier between you and the world, as Maurice Nicoll says here, that there's something in between you and life. And if the work is strong in you, like what would Yoda would say, the force is strong in Luke, then there is a strong separation. And so, we have a comment here. I don't know if you're still here. Let me know, Stephen Larn. Nice to see you and welcome. I hope you're doing well. Stephen Larn says, evening, Lewis, off to see the Sphinx in a few days. Intensely worried all the time about absolutely everything, though mainly about breaking unspoken taboo. And Stephen, are you referring to an unspoken taboo regarding like the Egyptian culture and the Sphinx and the pyramids, or which unspoken taboo? And yeah, it's funny, it's actually been discussed in the chat in the Discord group earlier today, the Sphinx and objective art. I shared a few pages from Ouspensky's In Search of the Miraculous, where Gurdjieff speaks about objective art. But yes, have you been before, Stephen Larn? And what else do you have planned while in Egypt? And it's an incredible thing to see the Sphinx up close. I've actually been to Giza, the Giza Plateau, and seen the Sphinx and been inside the Great Pyramid. And it's remarkable. The most remarkable thing about it is the scale of it, that you can't really get from a picture. Even if you look at a picture with a little person standing next to the pyramid, it still doesn't do it justice. It's magnificent is probably the best word to describe it. And one could argue that it is a piece of objective art, you could say. Gurdjieff talks about objective art in the sense that it evokes the same response in every person. And I don't imagine any person on earth, unless they're really nihilistic and, don't care about much, would see it as magnificent, would be in awe of the pyramids. I don't imagine many people go, that's a bit of rubbish, loads of rocks. So very interesting. And let us know some more details if you care to share them, Stephen. But back to this psychological talk about worrying he's focusing on. And there is another popular pithy phrase that worrying is like sitting in a rocking chair. It'll give you something to do, but it won't get you anywhere. And oftentimes, again, from my own experience, from my own observation, when I have worried about something, when I've woken up and I've observed that there is this worry about something that may occur later in the day, oftentimes, I don't know, I was going to give a percentage, but that's pretty irrelevant. Most of the time, let's say, the thing that I was worrying about didn't occur. And so in those instances, in the days when I was worrying about something that may occur later in the day, it didn't occur. And so how much energy had I wasted worrying about the thing that never even occurred in the end? And this will likely often happen. We don't know how our day will progress. We don't know what will occur. And so worrying is, in a sense, like Maurice Nicoll says, using our imagination for a negative purpose and letting these eyes and our unconsciousness run away with us. So a lot, again, to take in. Very practical letter there. And I would definitely say to check out an essay or an exercise of the canon of the limbs, if you can find it. And also, if you just type in Gurdjieff on relaxation, hopefully that should give you some ideas. The book by Joseph Azizi has many interesting exercise that one can perform, but as Maurice Nicoll was saying there, relaxing. If you are very relaxed, if you ever had a massage or done deep meditation or been in a sauna for a long time, you come out feeling very relaxed. And so when you are as relaxed as that, again, maybe you should get a massage or go to a sauna if you worry a lot. You'll come out and you'll be so relaxed that it'll almost feel silly to worry about anything because you're that relaxed. Popular podcast that I like listening to, Joe Rogan would say that if you work out terribly hard, sort of super intense, then you've already done something really hard to start the day, and in a sense you find a level of peace through intense exercise, and everything, what's the saying, like water off a duck's back, you don't worry. And of course we're not crossfitters or intense exercisers here at the Four Ideals and studying Gurdjieff ideas, but what we are is, if we value the work highly, if we observe and remember ourselves often and take what Gurdjieff and Ouspensky and now Maurice Nicoll have left us, then we can have this barrier. In a later letter, I think it might be volume 3, but I could be mistaken, but I know Maurice Nicoll writes about it. He says this work is like leather for life. I think I've actually got a video here at the Four Ideals. He says the world is sharp. The Buddha says life is suffering. But Maurice Nicoll says life is sharp, prickly. You can stub your toe and cut your foot. Many people, when they complain and worry and want to change other people, change situations and conditions, those people want to lay leather all over the world. They want to, carpet the world in leather. And Maurice Nicoll says no, you're wasting far too much energy plastering the world with leather. Just build yourself some sturdy shoes and then you can head out. You've got the work, you've got these ideas, you've got all the things that Gurdjieff, Ouspensky, Nicoll and all the other authors have left us. So just make some sturdy shoes and head out into life and don't be affected. Use all the tools, all the material, all of the arsenal that we've been left to navigate life. And don't worry, don't identify, don't consider, don't express negative emotions. All of these things that we read again and again in all the books, they actually can be very helpful. And as Maurice Nicoll said there, we have to begin to work on ourselves and observe ourselves, observe these worries in us, and then head out into life and see what happens. Observe what happens when you observe the worry. Maybe say the serenity prayer, maybe realize how silly this recurring thought is and put it out of your mind, and how much freer, lighter and more energy you have. You won't be so tired. You won't be so lethargic. You'll feel lighter and more energetic. But that's all for this letter. Like I say, we'll be back tomorrow with some more psychological commentaries from Maurice Nicoll. Any questions, get them in the comments. I'll be happy to answer them. I've got several ideas for videos coming up from people asking questions, so thanks for those. Keep them coming in. Stephen Lahn, if you're still watching, have a safe trip to the Sphinx in Egypt and the Pyramid of Giza, and do send us some holiday snaps. But for now, if there's no more comments or questions, I'll say thanks for joining, everyone. I hope you found this letter of practical importance, stuff that you can take away into life. And for now, I'll say take care, look after yourselves, and I hope to see you tomorrow for the 22nd part of Volume 1 of Maurice Nicoll's Psychological Commentaries. So, guys, take care, have a good week, and I'll see you soon.